I declare open the public hearing of the Standing Committee on Primary Industries inquiry into factors shaping social licence and economic development outcomes in critical minerals projects across Australia. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which we meet today and pay respect to the elders past and present of the Indigenous peoples all across Australia. This hearing will be audio broadcast and the transcript of the proceedings will be published on the Parliament's website. I'm going to invite members of the committee to introduce themselves, commencing to my left.
Thank you. My name's Trish Cook. I'm member for Bullwinkle, which is the east of Perth.
Great. I'm Ashan Behabar, the federal member for Barton, which is just under Sydney Airport.
And Meryl Swanson, committee chair and member for Paterson in the Hunter and Port Stephens region. And I now welcome the representatives of the National Farmers Federation to give evidence. For the Hansard record, would you each state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Warwick Ragg, General Manager, Natural Resource Management, National Farmers Federation.
Tanami Deed, Senior Policy Officer, Natural Resource Management, NFF.
Thank you. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath. Oh, excuse me. Fiona Rashid also is joining us online. Fiona, could I please invite you to introduce yourself in the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Yes, Fiona Rashid,
Oh, Fiona, I might actually ask Warwick to repeat that information because we were having trouble hearing you there. We must have a little bit of a poor line.
So Fiona Rashid online is Senior Policy Officer with Primary Producers South Australia, a member of NFF.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Well, hopefully that line will clear itself up in due course, and welcome to you, Fiona. Thank you for coming in online. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as the proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. And I now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussions.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'll rely on the opening statement we made
yes.
round one.
Which we do have
yes.
on the Hansard record.
Yes.
So,
thank you.
And I should also add that the committee does thank you very much, Warwick, Tanami and Fiona for coming back, because our last hearing was rudely interrupted by divisions and pesky democracy. I say that fully with tongue in cheek. No, so thanks for coming back on a Friday.
What I might do is I've now got a couple of further pieces of information to hand, which I'm happy to table. I've got a couple of copies, maybe you can share, and I've also provided to the Secretariat I've emailed them to Bill this morning.
Oh, so, wonderful. Thanks.
So they're around, but I just, if it's okay, I just might spend a couple of moments just
if you could speak to those, just
yeah.
potentially for those listening online that don't just say what you've given us.
So the
please.
first one is the Victorian Farmland Protection Plan. So this is a document released by our Victorian member in response to a range of land use things. I think there's a couple of pages I'll draw your attention to. There's a commentary in there about, and they haven't numbered the pages, which is helpful, rehabilitation and decommissioning, and I'm not going to read all that to you, but just the high-level principles are that the rehabilitation requirements have to be binding, that there needs to be adequate investment from government in science, that no farmer should be left behind, and that the true cost of a project needs to be properly accounted for, including the community costs. So they've really sort of tried to frame the process by which people need to go through to, satisfy communities. Related to that is some commentary that VFF have provided me that there's a mine, and am I going to have it? I think it's called the Fingerboards Mine in Western Victoria, where it's taken some time to approve. In fact, it was not approved, and then they started the whole process again, and yet it's not an appropriate place for it because it's one of the highest value valleys in fresh produce in the state. I don't really want to go into data centres, but there's also some data centre discussions going on about where they're going to be, but more about not only where they exist, but the resources they need. So clearly they need access to the grid electricity. They're pretty heavy users of electricity. They also need water, and water is pretty contested in critical areas of Australia for agriculture. So what we'd be unlikely to be happy with is, dumping data centres in the middle of the Murray-Darling Basin, for example, where it's already highly contested and at or near at. So that's the Victorian example, and I'm happy to come back and to the extent I can interrogate that a bit more with you.
Sure.
The other one is this is just a media release, but there's more detail behind it that we can work with Bill to get if necessary. Perhaps the two critical things I talk about there. So this was in relation to coal seam gas development in the Condamine alluvium. I'm sure Michelle Landry would be quite familiar with it if she were here. What's just happened is legislation has passed Parliament to ensure that the prime ag land is able to be protected. A couple of key things in there. They've got this thing called a Regional Interest Development Approval Framework, which is a protection mechanism for the farm sector. So there actually has to be some process around it. And can you see the theme here? You can't just go out and do this. We need some process. And by way of further explanation, the RIDA, R-I-D-A, provides farmers with an important negotiation tool when resource development is proposed, and retention of the framework in this amended legislation was a key ask from QFF and our peak body members through the Parliamentary committee process. So that's just a couple of comments there. I think broadly I would say, and I've probably said this in my earlier opening statements, any of these need to be done carefully with the community, with respect to the resources, with respect to the wind down and rehabilitation, and making sure they're appropriately funded. So there's just some opening comments, and happy to take your questions. Oh, Fiona might have something. I don't know whether she's got better connectivity now.
Fiona, did you want to add any thoughts to that?
I just can you hear?
Yeah, it's not good, Fiona.
No, sorry.
No, I'll find reconnect.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. If you could, that'd be great. I think there's a couple of things we probably. That's actually a really interesting. I'd like to unpack the. Did you call it the RIDA, Warwick? That's
RIDA,
that's how you the R. So it's the Regional Interest Development Approval Framework and a number of other. So this is basically, if I'm hearing you correctly, in Queensland, they've put that into their. Have they put it into legislation?
Into law, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. And so, if you're able to, we maybe don't need to do it straight away, but I wouldn't mind unpacking that in a few minutes, because I think that this is potentially something that could formulate a recommendation of ours as well.
Yes.
Because we're constantly saying, how do we come up with processes that your members feel as though they do have that social licence, they do have, basically they have equity in the conversation and are able. I think I read in your submission that farmers want to feel as though they actually have some power in the decision-making process, and that's rather than feeling as though for whatever reason they've been run roughshod over and the decisions taken don't really take their considerations into account. So I'm probably paraphrasing you there, but that was my takeaway from it.
That's accurate. And look, I think what we've got here is now an increasing body of evidence where our state members, because most of the interaction is through state legislation, engaging with government in a proactive manner to get rebalance, and I've talked about information asymmetry before, rebalance how these things are dealt with. Exemplars probably putting it a bit high, but Queensland is certainly being very forward-thinking, not only with this particular legislation, but when some of the earlier Surat Basin gas fields development was done, there was the development of consultative mechanisms. There's not really a fidelity fund, but there's a mechanism to ensure rehabilitation is undertaken. Those are the sorts of examples that we think should be in the forefront of minds when these new proposals are being brought forward, whether they're data centres, whether they're critical minerals, whether they're renewables, whether they're transmission lines.
Basically anywhere where there's land use contestability for agricultural land. That's, I mean, we're focused on critical minerals and you know, that's what we've been charged with. But I understand your general premise in terms of renewables. It's or a mine. In fact, we can talk about a mine, which is, you know, what we're looking at here today. It's the life of mine. And I think they call it, in terms of the accounting, it's the full picture accounting. So it's from concept to closure and beyond. And it sounds to me like that other end of this is your big concern as well. So it's the rehabilitation, you know, back to whether it's back to what it was, or at least back to something that's usable. Is that what you're contending?
Yeah, and I think it's probably both ends. So it's getting it right in the proposal development stage, but it's also making sure that, you know, they walk away. The proponents walk away having fulfilled their obligations for rehabilitation. And I think I mentioned last time we met, we're concerned that poor corporate behaviour of, you know, transferring ownership and developing Phoenix companies that all of a sudden don't exist anymore when you need them to be there doing the rehabilitation. There needs to be structures that don't allow that to happen. And the only way we can see in the current, you know, way the world operates in Australia is that there is a commitment to make that investment in that sort of fidelity type rehabilitation fund. So that takes off the table the capacity to disappear.
Okay. Yeah. I think I just noticed the words I was looking for. True cost accounting.
That's it. Yes.
In your document, so we will take that and have a look. And the other aspect that occurs to me in relation to this is something that we covered off in food security, and it was the idea of natural capital accounting as well. So actually, on one end, you've got the true cost, which involves all of the development and the rehabilitation, but you've also got this idea of natural capital accounting, which is taking into full account and value what the land is actually capable of doing and how much the water that it may have, or, you know, the actual, rather than just a block of land and saying, well, this is worth X, what is its actual productive value in real dollars and figures as a productive accounting exercise. And we had a couple of experts come and talk to us about that, and I thought that was a really interesting thing. So you're really looking at that true cost from productivity to repatriation, you know, making it do what it did before, or at least somewhere close to that.
Yeah, and that's important. And one of the things that we're also conscious of, and I alluded to it, is, you know, if you, I'm aware of a data centre proposal in, I think, sort of between Geelong and Melbourne, which is competing for water that's currently being used for the food production bowl of Melbourne. So that's kind of a problem, right? You need to think about where you're going to get your alternative convenient food sources.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I want to go to the interaction. Oh, Fiona, you're there and we can see you, so I might take an opportunity if the line's clear. Did you want to make some remarks and just a contribution while we look as though we've got a decent connection, Fiona?
Yes, sure. Thank you. I think in terms of water, just going on from what Warwick was saying, communities that are reliant on water for their livelihoods are by nature going to be concerned if there is a development that comes in that is going to jeopardise that. So I think in the southeast of South Australia, where there's a very strong reliance on the underground water, the critical mineral exploration that's currently in process through the Coppermurra project, the concern from those in the community is that there isn't a clear there isn't a clear pathway at the moment for how that project is going to access water. So they have to buy a licence off the open market, but the water resource is already under stress. It's restricted, and there's a water allocation process underway that is potentially going to restrict allocations already. So if you've got a new, very large water user coming into the region, the concern is, well, we haven't got enough for the agricultural industry that's there as it is. So how are we going to then provide water for a significantly, large new water user that comes in? And the other issue that concerns those in the region in regards to water is around the integrity of the aquifer. So with some of these processes that are coming in, they are, let's say, they're still working out how they're going to undertake the mining activities and extract the minerals from the clay soils. And so concerns around whether there's going to be use of acids that might leach into the aquifer, all of those things are still being worked through. So for the community that is, reliant on water for their livelihoods, for those things to still have question marks next to them is what places uncertainty and concern for them about, okay, A, where are they going to get the water from? And B, even if they do get the water, some of these mining processes that then jeopardise the current aquifers, and there aren't clear answers to those questions yet, they obviously place uncertainty over the project.
And I guess that really then calls into question the whole idea of social licence, doesn't it? Because we're asking how do we better get social licence? And of course, water is a highly contested resource, particularly in South Australia. So you do raise valid points. I mean, and we do have a tension between wanting to stand up these projects and they're incredibly important from a geopolitical and strategic point of view. But we also need to make sure that we can feed our country and do all the things that are of utmost importance. So it's a point. They're points that are well made.
Absolutely, and it's a balance, I suppose, between coming in and consulting early. We want early engagement from companies, and we want them to be, bringing the community along in terms of their processes and what they're working through. But the flip side of that is that because there is still uncertainty about how they are going to undertake some of these activities, that then, I suppose, undermines some of the trust, because if you're still working it out, then the community thinks, well, then you're kind of experimenting us. We're the guinea pig, and if things are to go wrong, then it's whole industries and regions and communities that rely on the water that are then at risk.
There's a question here in my notes that I think probably works well within this framework, and it's should we as a government be developing comprehensive guidance for obtaining social licence in these projects, and I think there's probably most definitely a role for us here.
Yes, I think so. And maybe I'd characterise it this way. We need to recognise the subtle yet probably significant differences in how each jurisdiction addresses these issues. We've talked about the Queensland approach. I think where I'm going is there needs to be a coordination of comfort, making sure that if there are some broad guidelines where thresholds can be tested in each jurisdiction and make sure they're met. I've been around trying to harmonise things with states and territories for far too long, but I would strongly encourage the Commonwealth to map expectations and to the degree that can be aligned with where states are going, that would be good. But as is always the case in this federation, some states are at different levels of progress than others. I've talked about where I think Queensland is leading on that. New South Wales, for example, have just brought in right to farm legislation. The Victorian document contemplates that. So that, Fiona might have a better idea than I don't think that's in South Australia yet. But certainly a set of principles that we could then collectively go to jurisdictions and go, well, here's some threshold issues, and you may even have the power, I haven't thought this through, to tie that to some of the sort of development things, because some of the development consents will have to come through a Commonwealth process.
Enforceable standards is something that's been sort of thrown around as well. Trish?
So I'm just sort of taking a step back and thinking, is there a system that we already have, perhaps, where the prime agricultural land is already mapped? Like, how does... I see your natural resource management, and there's that actual group called natural resource management, because I have the wheat belt natural resource management, and they basically have mapped all the areas. They know all the very sensitive environmental native areas that need to be carefully managed, and presumably they would know the prime agricultural land. Is that something like mapping this out so that, because at the moment, how does it work? Is it just if a farmer wants to sell up, they sell up? If they're approached? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so let me answer the first question before the second question. So broadly you would expect so, but there's a couple of problems, and let me draw back on 30 years experience in this space. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Mapping prime ag land is one thing, and there's capability maps, which is kind of what you're referring to. Not surprisingly, they differ in how they're developed and how they're defined across jurisdictions. So you don't have a national map of soil capability, or so there's that problem. That may begin to resolve itself. Frankly, a number of farmers have different views about what prime ag land is. Most of them think their land is prime ag land. It's not clearly defined anywhere. But by way of example, I participated, in fact still do participate, in a process led by Melbourne University and former Chief Scientist Robin Batterham on scenario planning for Net Zero Australia. And one of the discussions we had was where would be a really smart place not to put, solar and wind, but particularly solar, and that's on floodplains, not only because it's high-performing agricultural land, but because really water and electricity don't go that well together. So, there's some logic there. But to your second question, we absolutely argue for the right of volunteerism in this, and that's one of the reasons transmission lines are so controversial, because they just go, we're going that way, here's a bucket of money, best of luck, guys. Renewables, and batteries, etc., are different, because that's a choice a farmer can make to engage in that. Within the context of this inquiry, though, because critical mineral rights have a power, it's likely that there could be some compulsory acquisition. So that's a concern for us. We'd much rather it being done by consultation and engagement, but it's a bit hard to move where the minerals are. So then you have to have the discussion about what's the best way to utilise those.
Thanks, Chair. Just looking at the document that you've provided, I'm not sure what page that would be. Maybe page 2.
No,
that's all right.
Page numbers would have been helpful.
That's all right. Particularly on that shared prosperity bit, so communities hosting energy and mining projects should share in the wealth generated through a dedicated fund focused on enhancing agricultural productivity across the state. Can you just provide some reflections around an ideal model, and thinking nationally what kind of considerations are on how you're weighting on interests, particularly for farm owners and then obviously the local community, because I think that feeds into that getting that social license from the community. What are we getting back is probably can be very much said about anything really. So
look, that's difficult, and it's probably a PhD. I think the first thing I'd say is I doubt we've got an ideal model, and I doubt we ever will, and it'll depend, right, on the various circumstances, on land capability, on community disposition. And that's a really difficult thing to do. I think I talked in the first hearing about how, depending on the intervention, how communities react to it, different parts of the single community will react differently. So some will go, oh yeah, that makes sense, that's good. I think the core to your question, though, is what do we need to start seeing out of these processes? So we need to see communities are more engaged and more vibrant. So if there are things that need doing in communities, there's already models of co-investments for proponents in, and this is trite, but fixing up the local football field, better change rooms or lights. That's community visibility on, you know, what this organisation is bringing to town. Where there are infrastructure impacts, a shared obligation to deal with, you know, the damaging roads, or whether they need to go around a town rather than straight down the main street. Those things need to be worked through. Things like in renewables, won't work so much in critical minerals, but in renewables, a notion that if the power's being generated within a community, then do they get cheaper electricity? Like, where's the broader benefit to the community that it's being developed there? Someone's selling it somewhere, but, you know, and there's some technical difficulties with this, but how do we make sure that there's a tangible community benefit to those sorts of things? So they're the sort of threshold issues that communities expect, and they'll you know, they'll go to town hall meetings and they'll have chats, and some will like it and some won't, and, you know, they'll think someone's doing better out of it than others. That's life. That's democracy.
I think it's human nature.
Yes,
to be honest
yes.
with you, it depends. You know, self-interest is always the best backed horse. So if someone's got something to benefit from something, then, you know, they'll stick up for that. And if someone else has got another benefit, they'll you know, fight hammer and tong for that. So
and one model that's interesting is just out here. There's a wind farm. It's been there for quite some time. It'll come to me where it's actually at. But one of the models that they have used there, which really satisfied a range of community concerns, was so the way renewables work, wind farms work, is you get paid per wind farm on your property, and I think it's an annual payment. What they were able to negotiate there was that some of that payment went to neighbours where their amenity might have been affected. So they felt included in the impact and getting something out of that, rather than just, you know, my neighbour's getting all the benefit, I've got to look at this eyesore, and I get nothing out of this. And you know, in regional and remote communities, anything you can do to remove disharmony, because there's surely other ways that disharmony exists anyway, is a really good thing. So that was good. Trial isn't applying everywhere, but it's certainly been seen as an example. Fiona, I don't know whether you've got any experience down there with transmission lines and things yet?
Yes, more in the renewables kind of space, and also more in projects that are currently being developed rather than ones. There aren't that many that are operating here in the southeast. There are some that have further south that have been going for about 20 years. But an example similar to yours, Warwick, that I have heard of is around, so again, in the renewables context, but there's applications across other land uses, is that the landholder themselves obviously gets their annual lease payment, but then the developer or the project proponent puts an annual amount as well. So rather than one just upfront kind of payment, an annual amount that can go into a fund that can then be provide grants to local, sporting communities or organisations. And there are two different models. One is that those grants are then, the decision is decided by the project proponent somehow through them, but another is to have a community kind of committee or board that then makes that decision, so that then again there's community engagement in terms of how the benefit is distributed across the community. But I think one comment that I would make is that there does need to be caution in terms of those. Yes, we want community benefits, but there is also a perception that project developers and proponents are coming in and trying to buy off the community. So whilst we definitely want community benefit out of any project, the underlying concern is to address those broader issues like water, soils. So unless they're addressed, then there won't be a social licence. But once they have been addressed, and you can provide assurance to landholders that their own, access to water and their soils will be, not affected, and that remediation, decommissioning kind of part of it. Once those key aspects are then addressed, the environmental sustainability side, then yes, I think obviously there needs to be benefits that flow onto the community. So then I think being transparent in terms of any royalties, how that passes, whether that's to the federal government, state government, just transparency there in terms of what the benefits are to the state and Australia, as well as then making sure that they flow on to the community. And as Warwick said, that there aren't any unintended consequences that the community has to bear. So things like, road damage. You don't want a local government then having to increase their road maintenance or renewal budget because of a project in their area, particularly if there isn't going to be much that flows on to them. And that local government rates is another aspect that I think needs consideration as well, how the local government and the council is, supported, because they obviously would have an increase in their activities through projects moving in.
Thanks, Fiona.
Yeah, thank you, Fiona. I think those are points well made. And whilst this inquiry is focused on social licence and economic development of critical minerals, there are lessons most definitely to be learned from. It's just straight mining, coal mining. I can speak with a little bit of authority on, the ways we've done that well in the Hunter and the ways that we could have really done it much better. And community benefit sharing is a really interesting beast, because you do want the community to benefit, but in saying that, you don't want the community to feel as though it is, to use your language, being bought off, or it's a tokenistic effort. Okay, we're going to extract X billions of dollars of wealth out of the ground, and we're going to sponsor a few football jerseys over a few years, and everything will be sweet. It's a lot like the world and mining practices. Things are more sophisticated, and things need to be more sophisticated around that, and there has to be greater understanding. And your point's well made. My mind keeps going to royalties for the regions, which was a program that was used whereby regions that did see themselves, that were at the heart basically of the extractive industries, where there is more pressure on local infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, a whole manner of things, schools, hospitals, they needed to see real input and benefit. And again, local government, when we were out west of New South Wales, they were at pains to say often they are the sole entity responsible for housing, for all of the things that come along with supporting these big industries, and it's very difficult for them to do it on their own. So I think your evidence is great.
I just have one other question.
Please, yeah.
Apologise, because this is a very new area for me, given that I'm from the more city side, metro side of Sydney. I know we talk a little bit more about physical infrastructure, and that's what I've been hearing, particularly through the inquiry. What about the sort of the softer services? Like, I know a lot of things is expected by the state, respective jurisdictions, to provide those services. I'm thinking like health, education. Yeah. What about that in a sense of if I was living in a community where I saw that kind of benefit, it might have a better role in that social license rather than just, the infrastructure piece.
Yes. Yeah.
Could you maybe talk a little bit about that?
So, there's probably a couple of aspects I'd dwell on there. So, my observation, and it's a distant observation, is that the development of the new airport in Sydney has come with commensurate hard infrastructure. There's rail lines, there's new roads. I haven't got visibility, but I anticipate that the population explosion around Oran Park probably hasn't been fully met with social infrastructure, health, education, etc. To the degree it probably should have. I'm sure there's new schools. If we think about Singleton, when I was up there all of those years ago, Singleton town was kind of off the main thoroughfare. It's better now because you can go around Singleton.
We're working on that. It's not quite open yet, Warwick, but we're
getting there.
And
that's the point. I mean, coal mining in the Hunter Valley's been there forever, but there's a lag on, and this is probably to your point, there's a lag on public infrastructure with private investment. How we go about coordinating that, and I know there's competition in budgets and everyone needs stuff. So, but major expansions will need major infrastructure contiguous commitment, I guess. to just make sure that those issues you're aligning with. The corollary is the water example in the Murray-Darling Basin, where, you know, one of the things that was being proposed in the face of buybacks was, oh, well, we'll build a new hospital in Deniliquin. And we're kind of going, well, why would you do that? Deniliquin's depopulating, the main streets, a third of the shops are empty. There's no one going to want to go to the new hospital, but sure, thanks, build a new hospital because that's nice. You just got to get the right infrastructure. Yeah. So yes, we do, but it's got to be the right infrastructure at the right time for the right purpose. Were you adding something to that?
Oh no, I think that's correct. Just in terms of the funding, are you talking about like royalties going into that, or is
Yep. I guess it's more so, when you're thinking about what is the community getting back, we talk a lot about physical infrastructure, and rightfully so, and that might be just the needs base, right?
Yes.
But also, if we want to also build a community, I think about the soft skills or training people or supporting that next generation. I'm just thinking of that sense, and more like in that education or training nurses. Is there space in that for funding?
Thanks, Ash. David, I can see that you've joined us online and you have your hand up. Did you have a question that you wanted to put to the National Farmers?
Yes, I do, and thank you. I've been online since the start of the meeting via the phone. And, finally got our
I apologise, David. We didn't. I've only just got a visual on you, so I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to our witnesses, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm David Farley, the federal member for Farrer, and have I got an interest in this area? Yes, I have, and I'd like to contribute. So. When the opportunity arises, Chair, I would like to contribute some questions.
Please, well, this is that time now, David, so please feel free.
Thank you. I've been listening to the conversation to date and reminisce across my experiences in the Murray-Darling Basin debate, especially over the retraction and take back of water and what it's done to our communities. I also listen intently of watching residential developments in our larger areas in Farrer, how they're being interfered with constant rule change. And I'd like to share some of my experiences that I got out of California, Arizona and New Mexico in regard to this as well. I think the most important thing that I've learned over the years in regard to both the impact of mining and the impact of the buyback of water and the water debates generally, not only in Australia but around the world, is today I've been listening to the words social value, which is always very, very hard to put a value around. But when you actually look at the value that we should be looking at, and it is quantifiable, and that's intrinsic value to communities, and that an intrinsic value does have valuation models that go around it, which are principally developed off the Blackett and Scholes option modellings that take into time all the five important Greek formulas of theta, zeta, gamma, and rho. And I do think that what we've got to be able to do here, and I reflect back to the question of the statement on Deniliquin, is why would you put a hospital there when the population is retracting because of water buybacks? And the reality is the population's retracting because the intrinsic value of water has been removed from the community, from Deniliquin. And the intrinsic value of water was that it created jobs and service industries to the primary industries that were using water. So I think we should be, when I say we, the collective around the table, should be thinking about beyond social value, which is always very difficult to quantify into dollars, is going back to the capital markets, because that's what's driving these developments of critical minerals, and starting to use the formulas that they do to create their short-term and long-term values to it, and then understanding intrinsic value of the community. So I would just be keen to put it on the record that our valuation models on community in particular need to be at least understandable in the languages of the capital market and the investment market, And social values isn't one that actually sits inside prospectuses when you read it, but intrinsic value, people really understand intrinsic value in the world of capital markets.
Thank
That's
you,
one
David.
of my points.
David, what we might do is, and now I know you're there online. I do apologise again. I didn't realise you were there. But we'll have a chance as a committee to really unpack some of that and explore that in greater detail as a committee when we're formulating our recommendations and finalising the report. So we'll get a chance to get together just while we have witnesses today. If you had any other specific questions, but we will have to draw to a close at 9:40 the NFF. But now I know you're there, I'll definitely come to you for some questions for our next set of guests who are joining us. So we'll do that.
Could I squeeze in one last question to the NFF, please?
Yep, please, yep.
That last question is, we need to have consideration for the landholder that they will be incurring expenses on this, whether they've got to get independent consultants in or whether they've got to go to their solicitors and get caveats registered on their title to protect their asset. Any of these applications need to be mindful of the investment that the farmer's got to invest capital in going forward. Therefore, he should be able to be compensated that he protects his title into the future.
Yeah, thanks, David, and we would agree with that. I think we've talked, I'm not sure whether you're online, we've talked about particularly information asymmetry and ensuring that the individual farmers is as empowered as the proponents to make informed decisions. And if that requires co-investment in technical and legal and accounting advice, then that should be the case.
To David's, I'm just going to intercede here. David wasn't a part of that last. He's only just joined the committee at the last meeting, so he wasn't. He didn't get to hear that evidence. So we can bring you up to speed with some of that evidence as well, David. I know it's very difficult when you come into something a little bit behind. You know, you can't help the fact that you were appointed to the committee yesterday, so you're doing well so far. So thank you very much for that. I would like to thank you for your attendance today. Now, you haven't been asked to provide any additional information, but you'll be sent a copy of the transcript of the evidence, so you can have the opportunity to request corrections to any transcription errors. But look, thanks sincerely for your time and energy and effort and your submission. I know a lot of effort and resourcing goes into these things, and we do take them seriously, as do we take your evidence and your suggestions seriously when we formulate the reports and make recommendations in the hope that they can shape legislation and guidance and regulations moving forward. So we do thank you sincerely.
Thank you. And look, we're available as you get into the nuts and bolts of this. If you want to come back and clarify, we're very happy to have that discussion. Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Warren.
Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks, Fiona.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Yes, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
We'll just let our next witnesses take a seat.
I hope it makes sense. I hope I was making sense.
All right, then we'll resume. I now welcome Mr. Rezat Noor to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you. So I'm Rezat Noor, doing my PhD in Monash University. So I'm with the Social Science Department here.
Thank you very much. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standing as proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. And I now would like to give the committee a brief chance to introduce themselves so you know where we're from and who you're dealing with. Please, Trish.
Hello, my name's Trish Cook. I'm the member for Bullwinkle, which is in Western Australia, just east of Perth. And I'm also a PhD candidate.
Very good.
Nearly done.
Thanks, Chair. I'm Ash Ambihabaha, the federal member for Bison, which is just on the southern part of Sydney Airport.
Excellent. And David, you're online. Would you like to introduce yourself to our witness, please?
Yes, good morning, Nord. My name is David Farley, and I'm the federal representative of Barra in south and southwest New South Wales.
And good morning, Meryl Swanson, Committee Chair and Member for Paterson, which is in the beautiful Hunter and Port Stephens regions of New South Wales. I now invite you to make an opening statement.
Honourable Chair and members of the Parliament Committee, thank you so much for making the invitation and giving me the chance to present my evidence and everything to this really, really important inquiry. So as I've mentioned, I am Riyasat, just call me Riyasat, and I'm a PhD student. So my work is just the exact title of this inquiry, which is really fun when I just was working on my document. So my topic is exploring the dynamics of social license to operate in Australia's critical minerals industry. So I'm just looking at Victoria's practice right now and trying to replicate the findings in the bigger mining states such as Queensland and Western Australia. So that is my position in my PhD right now. So what I'm doing is that I'm doing a set of parliamentary document analysis, other environmental effect statements document analysis, as well as also interviewing key candidates from defined community members, industry practitioners, advocacy partners, academia and resource, and definitely with government officials. So those are based mainly in Victoria as of right now. So
in Victoria.
In Victoria, yeah.
Sure.
So what I want to do is that from my own findings, I just want to generate some sort of patterns or randomness that appear to define the dynamics of social license, because this is right now a very new topic for the Victorian mineral industries, because in Victoria we have a very unconventional way of having a very, how do I put it, like side-by-side practice of mining and agriculture. So that is having some community backlash and conflict. So that was my point. And other than that, I was involved with previous, other than my current PhD, I was involved with defined policy and governance related issues, working with defined organizations such as United Nations, Department of Economic and Social Affairs before coming here, and also with the National University of Singapore, and before that with the Asian Development Bank Institute. So in this work today, I'll be presenting the key findings from my 44 interviews that I have conducted so far. So those are just the findings, not the analysis that will be done in the next phase. So my key points will be here today is four points: that the temporal dynamics of social license, how that is affecting the whole industry, what was there, what is right now, and how the industry is going and moving forward. And then the triple threats from mining, agriculture, then transmission line projects and defined other infrastructure projects that is creating some barriers in Victoria specifically. And then there's some power shifting between different government agencies when it comes to actual planning and implementing the mining projects. So there's a lack of coordination that has been raised again and again by the different stakeholders, and also another power shifting happens as a result of polarization between different metropolitan and rural perspectives. And finally, as I've noted, the clash between these agriculture and mining practices in Victoria. So these are my key points, and I'd be happy to take any discussion and questions.
Thank you so much. So you've conducted 44 interviews for your PhD, and it's quite remarkable that we've stood up an inquiry and we've got a PhD candidate doing his very PhD on
Yeah.
what we're looking at today. So basically, social license in critical minerals. So is there, and I've picked up on the 4 main points that you've given. Is there a theme? Is there one main theme that you have picked up on in your interviews so far? Has something been repeated, if not 44 times, but a majority of the time, where is there a clear outstanding theme, or is it far more complicated than that? And I do pick up on what you're saying, that the power dynamic and land use conflict, basically we've got this precious land, we've got precious things that we want to extract from it, but we've also got very precious activities that we want to do on it, which is agriculture or whatever they may be. So am I following along fully what you're thinking?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
Definitely. That was my fun part, because when I was just doing this initial analysis, these several key points and patterns came again and again in the interviews, whether they're regardless of being the stakeholder type. So I was doing these interviews with different proponents, although that was not much, because in FICTRA there are projects are being held in a much more exploration stage. So rather than not much into actual implementation and digging kind of stuff. So I would say they're much more shy at this point of going public in terms of giving interviews. I'm talking about the proponents.
So the proponents are shy to give interviews because they're concerned about the conflict that may arise with land use conflict. Okay. Yep.
Land use conflict, and also their participation with the public is a bit not more regular, because I was saying compared to other states, FICTRA has a very conflicting situation right now. So in FICTRA, there are no new mining licenses being given at this point. I mean, if you think about retention licenses, if you think about just continuing previous exploration licenses, those are being given, but not any new licenses. So this is my perception and initial understanding by talking with these different stakeholders, that yes, if they're not shy, they might have some sort of reservation before going to public due to these outstanding issues. And the power dynamics that I was talking about came from the local government officials. So one of the main issues picked again and again by different LGS and RTS, I was talking to different executives and the head of the councils, that they see themselves as the closest ally to the real community from the grassroots community, because they work day to day with the communities, and they speak on behalf of the communities. And when they're saying that the actual implementation and the resource allocation in terms of finance and non-finance resource doesn't come to the LGS. So that goes back to even further points, such as the net zero transition and net benefit sharing. So the net zero transition is seen as a very big, broader, high-level policy kind of thing that doesn't affect or doesn't impact the local communities. That being said, the local communities are much more interested in immediate local benefits. As Chair was just saying before, that people are much more interested about self-interest and self-benefits. That came again and again. And I'm just quoting some of the community advocates, that if they're not being offered the local benefits with regard to any financial or non-financial mechanisms, and the things, these extractive practices happen at the backyard of these people, then they don't bother about the greater impacts that can make the country benefit or anything as such. So going back to the original point of having the defiance. So local communities see that the actual implementation and the resource allocation doesn't happen at ground level. So the benefit goes to the state in terms of royalties. Royalties do not come back to the local communities, and local governments are much more worried about having these royalties being included in some form in the capacity so that they can channelize the benefits to the local community directly, because as I've said, they are the closest ally of the local communities.
I think that's a really salient point, and we have heard it before, and I'm sure all of us have heard it over the years. You know, we do have this tension where we've got local communities who, you know, as you've said, they're seeing things being extracted, things being dug up, things being put on their land, whether, you know, whatever it is, and they're like, well, they feel they have direct community ownership. Like this is our community. We live here. We feel, even if they don't directly own that piece of land, they have ownership over the area, and they feel acutely the impacts of what's going on in their patch, in their community. So they say, well, we should reap some of the benefits, and then you have governments like state governments and federal governments that come in and say, no, we'll take the royalties, or we'll take, you know, and we'll decide what's best for everyone. So, and this is really, as I said, where the tension lies, because the people who are directly impacted want a slice of the action, and then state and federal authorities like us come over the top and say, well, no, we'll collect the royalties and we'll build more hospitals and schools and roads, and we'll make the decisions. Yeah. So it really is about you know, addressing that. And I want to get to just one thing, and then I'll go on to other members of the committee. But there was something in your submission that I really thought was interesting. It was the effectiveness of the engagement practices and options between jurisdictions and the Commonwealth, and this is something that we're really facing at the moment. So I suppose yesterday we focused on regulation and approvals processes and permitting and how we improve that. But from the people you've spoken to, how do they think we could improve that? Because we spoke yesterday to public servants and bureaucrats, and you know, everyone thinks they're doing a terrific job. So whether or not they are, who knows? You know, we all think we're doing a good job, but we may be not doing a good job. But so I'm interested in, from the interviews that you've done, you know, what you've learned about how we possibly could do that better.
Well, Chair, I mean, if I just go back a single point, social license is now being seen as a very temporal thing, meaning that the license word can be misleading to some extent, that it can mean that this is a physical evidence you're giving away to the proponent or any practicing proponent to do a certain things given permission by the communities, which is not. So this license term is misleading, number one. Number two is that for the same reason, now social license is now being replaced with similar, much more nuanced and softer terminology, such as social value, social performance, benefit sharing, net zero. So I'm just picking keywords for my interviews. So
we should, in fact, drop the word licence, because that sort of has this overtone of it's almost like a permission, and we should be not asking for social licence. We should be even talking about community benefit sharing, and what was the other word that you used?
Like social performance, social value. So social values was being picked up by BHP in 2019, and that was replaced by social license. So their perception and their understanding was that license is a very hard word, and especially the farming communities, which are much more sensitive towards mining, they can be triggered by this word. And I did spoke with Victorian Farmers Federation, VFF, and also some of the local farmers near Swan Hill, so that is between NSW and Victorian border. So they picked up the same thing again and again, that license is a very hard word. So I made this introduction just for the sake of answering a chair's question regarding how the federal and state authorities can do much more better coordination. So a few points that I wanted to share that. Well, I did mention that LGS are the closest ally. So in terms of so their perception is that mining is still a bad thing, generally speaking, and they say that this social license is just coined by the mining people just to justify the resource extraction. Yeah. So this, unfortunately, so this is their understanding. So speaking of that, several issues that can be done to bridge the gap. So definitely environmental safeguards. And that being said, for instance, Victoria doesn't have any water purification and standard measurement criteria. So that is one issue said by the local governments and also different hydrologists and practicing scientists. So that can be modified to show some better grip in terms of scientific evidence and baseline data. So that is one thing. Number two.
So I just want to make sure I've heard you correctly there. No, so looking at water purification and the data around that. So Victoria doesn't have a lot of that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I mean in terms of baseline data, Chair. So
right. Okay.
So some I forgot the details, but I can get back to that later. But some advocacy and from individual capacity, some advocacy people are trying to do a comparison between baseline and endline data in terms of the actual comparison from like 15 years back when social license wasn't much issue, and comparing to the current endline or current present data. So that data couldn't be found. So that point was picked up at that point. So and then strengthening local government in terms of building capacity development for the locals. So again and again, fly in, fly out, and drive in, drive out models are picked up again and again. That Victoria doesn't have that at this point much, but then again, the people are coming from interstate, people are coming from overseas just to take a local job. So again, people are concerned about that thing, especially the communities. So that can be done, that can be addressed by doing some kind of better capacity development by local tapes and different vocational programs. That can be implemented, which was picked up as a key issue because with the rise of AI and automation, now the mining equipments and machines are being much more sophisticated. So there is another justification, interesting justification by the mining companies that for this AI and automation, locals cannot cope up with the difficulties of AI and the complexities of these machines. There's a reason that we hire people from interstate who have much more expert knowledge and ready-made skill set rather than providing capacity building to the locals, taking the time, resource, etc. So that's a short way of doing this stuff. But then again, that goes back to the local community benefit. That if you are doing the digging kind of stuff in our lands, but we're not getting any benefits, our children cannot get employed by the mining practices, then there's nothing for us. So long story short, strengthening this capacity development and capacity building for the locals to do the to replace the fly-in, fly-out, and drive-out models.
Okay.
Next would be definitely value proposition and cost-benefit analysis. So again, the net zero transition is being said that is a very big conceptual framework and that doesn't have any practical benefit sharing package. So the benefit package under net zero 2050 plan is very broad and wide and undefined. So that is again one of the key patterns identified. So that being said, the net zero benefit is and should be much more streamlined for the community perspective. So in terms of having the real royalties coming back to the communities, that's number one, definitely. And then thinking about employing the locals, number two that I've already mentioned. Number three would be definitely creating some sort of visible impact and effect to the local communities by building services such as hospitals, roads, and infrastructure, which in many cases...
But also what you said there, Nor, is capacity development. So, TAFE courses and building capacity within communities for extra training. I think that comes back to Miss Amber Haberhaar's earlier comment where she was saying, yes, we build roads, we build bridges, we build infrastructure, we build schools, we build hospitals, but what we should be building in these communities for them to feel real benefit rather than, and I'm not suggesting sponsoring sporting teams is not a good thing, but maybe we actually need to be investing in programs that train people and build capacity in communities. And I want to cite an example. We're currently in the throes of BHP closing Mount Arthur in the Hunter. And what they've offered their current workforce, it won't close till the 2030s, but what they're offering is now current employees can do training outside of work for whatever they want. And one of the executives from BHP told me on Monday night they've currently got a coal miner doing a medical degree, and they've got someone becoming a pilot, and they're paying for it. So am I picking up sort of, are we so this is broader than, and don't get me wrong, roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, they're all important, but we're talking about community capacity building and making people, giving people training opportunities. Am I picking up what you're saying? Yeah. And David, I'll come to you next, just to give you some warning.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely, Chair. I mean, interesting that you mentioned, because I just totally forgot to include that in my document, is that is called transition from employability, meaning that the fossil fuel best practice, coal, gas, etc., was there and has been there in Australia for quite a long time. And now slowly the industry is moving and towards these renewables. So the key issue was what happens to the people who are working with this fossil fuel best practice, who had this expertise, non-transferable in some way. Yeah. So they were given these opportunities I'm talking about in Latrobe Valley. If they wanted to move from those industry toward the adjacent fingerboards project just across the Latrobe Valley, they gave this training for the employees to upgrade and shift from fossil fuel to the renewables, because technicalities are almost similar, just some basic nuances and practices. So that is one way of doing that capacity development. So that is transferring and transitioning from the fossil fuel to. And then again, when I was talking about the actual physical things, those are actually from the communities that they ask again and again. And with all due respect, to some extent, that is what communities prefer, because that is much more tangible, that is much more understandable in a much more general way. Which we're talking about is much more valuable, definitely, and that provide much more bigger value proposition. But if you think about communities, sometimes I have felt that they do not understand or do not care about these bigger issues. So definitely the physical things, and definitely the bigger value proposition that can make the transition from the fossil fuel to the renewables. So definitely that's a very big one.
David, I'll come to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Noor. I think, Mr. Noor and Chair, this has really gone back to the nub, what I call the nub of the issue, to be able to accelerate these projects through, or to meet our objectives as a committee to guide government how to accelerate, is that the education process of LGAs in particular needs to be part of our process when we review. Is if we can do an education progress on either social value or what I call intrinsic value, they will be in a position to negotiate successfully not only the development itself, but also the value of the life of the development in contributing to their communities. So I pick up from Mr. Noor's presentation, and again, very similar to what came from the NFF, and related to what our objectives are. And I think it comes down to the simple thing of we need to be able to educate the LGAs better in how to negotiate their positions in these developments. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Did you have some lines of questioning?
Mine's pretty short. I'm just thinking, thank you, Chair. Obviously, we're talking about social licence, permission, value. And I was looking at a report recently, the Scallion Institute, that's talking about social cohesion. And I feel like maybe you might be in a position to maybe enlighten me a little bit about that connection between social license and social cohesion. Is that something that, because obviously social cohesion, and my 2 minutes in this role as well, I hear in the chambers it's like metro versus the regions, and so that division, that very binary way of thinking, no thanks to the help of social media, but are you able to give maybe more of an academic thought around what that connection looks like between social license and social cohesion?
Yeah, definitely, Ms.
Yeah.
Sampa. So interesting is that the CEO of this Scallion Institute, she is also a PhD candidate in Monash, so I'm quite familiar with her.
Okay.
And I do acknowledge and recognize her work in social cohesion. So that being said, social cohesion is much, and that is an interesting point because now the industry is moving toward much more community sentiment-based wording for social license. As I've said before,
right,
the
yeah.
license is kind of a hard and rude word.
Yeah.
And now the cohesion that you have mentioned is creating some, that gives some base and ground for making the community understand that the main components of social license, which is trust. Sorry that I haven't picked up before. So the trust is embedded, and if social, and speaking of that, social license is a continuous process. It's not just one-way consultation then checking the tick box and then getting away with the mission. That's not the way. And that being said, the cohesion and trust is just complementary because it goes back again and again in different phases. So speaking of academic way, social license was supposed to have different phases that can change its course and direction in different phases, but that didn't happen. And that was one interesting point, that speaking from cohesion and trust and those sort of sentimental wording, social license doesn't have any stages in academic and industry practices. So, I'll get back to the point. Social cohesion is much more, how do I put it? That is much more a way of putting the CSR practices in social license. Because when we're talking about social license, that sits between ESG practices, environmental, social, and governance regulations, and hardcore sustainability reporting kind of framework. So that is social licenses' weakness and strength at the same time, having no enforcement and measurement criteria. At the same time, that is its strength, that yes, it can be used for the betterment and improving the trust and these benefit sharing packages in a much more nuanced and packaged way of putting social expectations first. So social cohesion and social trust are achievable when the objectives of the communities are met. So that is my understanding so far.
Great, thank you.
Trish, did you have any lines of thought you want to pick up on?
I just wanted to.
Hello, Tom.
So, thank you for your submission. Could you just remind me, your 44 interviews, what sort of stakeholders did you interview?
Those are mainly community representatives,
Okay.
directly from the communities and their leaders, and then industry proponents,
Okay.
the mining executives, and then defined resource and industry practitioners, like in the capacity of consultancy or in industry associations, and then defined LGS and RTS. And I was lucky to have one executive from Resources Victoria, and then defined academias, and obviously defined research, other research institutions.
Okay, yeah. So it's quite a broad
Yeah, I'm
sweep
trying
of
to-
them all.
Yeah.
And so, talking about social assistance, or I'm from Western Australia, and I think it's very different from what you're talking about in Victoria. We have mining companies that build the towns and build the housing, and then it becomes quite permanent. Like I've worked in those places, but newer developments in my electorate in the Perth Hills, they're not contributing to housing at all. So it's very hard to have this drive-in, drive-out workforce is a huge problem for the local governments and road maintenance. Was housing mentioned in that part of what the community would appreciate?
It was
in terms of benefits?
many times, yes, Ms. Cook, because the rental crisis was pointed out as one of the key outcomes of this drive-in, route, fly-in, fly-out models apparently in Victoria. Although that is not taking much in Victoria right now, as I've mentioned, the Victorian practice is much more in exploration stages rather than actual project, other than Donald project in like Eastern Victoria, but other 4 or 5 projects are just in exploration stages. But community understanding, sentiment, and the actual practice from the community and LGS was that, yes, Victoria has a very small community-based township practiced areas, especially in regional Victoria, and that can be disrupted with this sort of social license or its absence kind of practices. And also another key point was mentioned that other than the rental situation and housing, was that people are now moving to bigger cities because they're not getting any jobs in local townships as a result of the mining people hiring people from interstate. So definitely housing was a main issue. Yeah, definitely.
Very interesting. Tom, I know you've just arrived late to the piece. Do you want to ask any? If you don't, I know you've just walked in, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but I didn't want to also ignore you and not give you the opportunity.
No, sorry, Chair. I have a public hearing upstairs. We're on a tea break, so I've just popped in for 10
thank
minutes.
you. You're splitting yourself between the two, so good on you for that. That's who says parliamentarians aren't hardworking? Look, I do want to thank you today. Is there anything we've missed that we haven't asked you, or that you feel that you're surprised we didn't ask about? I want to make sure that in the couple of minutes we've got left that you cover off. Thank you for your submission, and we have looked at it, and we will be taking it into consideration in the report. But are there any other points that you'd like to make to the committee that we maybe haven't asked you about? I know Trish just picked up on housing, which I do think is an important one. But is there anything else that we may have missed that you feel you need to make the point about just before we close?
Not particularly, Chair, but I just wanted to mention one of the key important things that is absent from both academic and industry practice and understanding is that in Victoria, the social license and its understanding and perception is a cumulative impact coming from defined previous legacy projects and infrastructure projects happening in Victoria. For instance, Victoria historically is right now an agricultural land for last 150 years. But then again, before that, it was a mining area, especially gold mining, and all the gold rush took place there. So that being said, the transition from traditional mining like gold mining and the ongoing transmission projects and ongoing renewables project, which is very much a big issue in Victoria right now. So the cumulative impacts from these projects are shaping the narratives and understanding of the community when it comes to the actual proposals of critical minerals to the same community. So the communities are taking these proposals with a grain of salt. They are not trusting the proposals, etc., etc. So that's one key issue that I picked up from my understanding. So that is not present in academia and industry documents.
Can I repeat not what I'm hearing from you, but what I'm processing in the information you're giving me, Nor, is that it feels to me like there's a cumulative trust deficit. No one trusts information. Yeah. They don't seem to trust each other. They don't trust the proponents. It is just they don't trust governments. No one trusts anything, and that feels to me like the currency is trust, and people feel as though, again, paraphrasing, and I'm loath to do so because I can see that you truly have looked at this in a granular way, but it's trust, and in terms of benefit, people feel as though they're not getting the benefit. And there's just massive trust issues, and whether it be information, benefit, buy-in, that feels to me as though that is the mountain. If we are to get, the community, I don't want to say the community on side, because again that feels as though we're trying to buy them off. But if we're going to get buy-in and benefit, we need to improve the trust, and people need to actually think, well, if they're going to extract these critical minerals, and you could slot into there any number of other things that we've talked about today, whether it's energy projects or whatever, people actually need to feel as though there is some upside for them and their and their lives more generally. Am I kind of am I embracing sort of the top line theme?
I think you did wrap up the whole argument and discussion very well. Just speaking of the information thing, just might I add that this rise of misinformation and disinformation is another part, which is much more apparent.
It's terrible.
Which is much more apparent especially in regional towns, where people can have low literacy, low understanding of technology, how things are happening, and especially if those towns have a good kind of role models who people follow, and then that role model have this kind of misinformation, disinformation, the whole crowd can follow him or her. So that can be triggering another ripple effect along the way. So that was another part that I,
Look, thank you very much. Thanks for coming along to talk to the committee today. We do appreciate it. You'll be provided with a transcript of your evidence, and you'll have the opportunity to request any corrections to transcription errors. But thank you for your submission. Thank you more broadly for the work that you're doing in this area to contribute to better outcomes for our country, and thanks for being part of the inquiry. We do appreciate it. All the best. Thank you. Now, we're going to suspend for a morning tea break until 10:40. Thank you, broadcast.
too, make you read a lot.
I'm a scientist as well, so it's always nice to sort of lean in on the academic side as well. Yeah. Anatomy, cell pathology, and histology. Yeah.
So we might reconvene. Thanks, broadcasting. I now welcome representatives of the Critical Minerals Consortium to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full names, the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Mohan Yalishetty, co-founder of Critical Minerals Consortium and also professor at Monash University in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering.
Thank you so much.
You.
Hi, I'm Dr. Tim Werner. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Geography, Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the University of Melbourne, and I coordinate the school's Responsible Mining and Energy Transition Research Group.
Thank you so much.
Hello, my name is Vivian Wong, and I'm appearing as a researcher on behalf of within Critical Minerals Consortium, and I've just finished my Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of Civil Engineering at Monash University.
Thank you very much. And online?
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Whittle, co-founder of the Critical Minerals Consortium and otherwise a consultant in the mining industry.
Thank you very much. I would like to give the committee the opportunity to introduce themselves to you as well. We might start with Mr. Farley, who's online, so I don't admit to do that.
Good morning. Yes, my name's David Farley. I'm the federal representative of FARA, and today I'm joining the meeting from Albury.
Thank you.
So Trish Cook, member for Bullwinkle, which is east of Perth in the Perth Hills and part of the wheat belt.
Ash Ambihapaha, the federal member for Barton, which is on the southern part of Sydney Airport.
And Meryl Swanson, Committee Chair and Member for Patterson in the New South Wales, Hunter and Port Stephens areas. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as the proceeding of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege, and I'd now like to invite you to make a brief opening statement.
Thank you, Chair and honourable members, for the opportunity to appear before you today. My name is, as I said, Mohan Yalishetty, Professor in Civil and Environmental Engineering at Monash University. I'm also a member of a Critical Minerals Advisory Group constituted by Victorian Government, and also I'm currently chairing Mineral Sands Agricultural Land Rehabilitation Working Group. I'm appointed by Honourable Lily D'Ambrosio, the Minister. So today I'm joined by Professor David Whittle virtually, and together we co-founded Critical Minerals Consortium, and Dr. Tim Werner from Melbourne University, and Vivian Wong, who was our proud undergraduate student who contributed to something really impactful, which you will hear from her in a short while. Honourable members, the Critical Mineral Consortium was an interdisciplinary collaboration led by Monash University, but it has a number of universities. And I'm also founder of Australia-India Critical Minerals Research Hub, which is, again, because Australia has got plenty to offer, so it's not only confined to ourselves, but we are leaders in the Indo-Pacific. So that's my main goal there. So critical minerals, as you would appreciate, present once in a three-generational opportunity for Australia. Perhaps this is the time that a lot of world is going to need a lot of them, and we have a lot of them. But it is clear from our reading of the submissions and also from our past research that there's in order to realize that opportunity in sustainable way, it's far from straightforward, just digging and selling. So there's so much that we need to do. We can't eliminate the competing interests of stakeholders because, as I said, I'm chairing Mineral Sands Working Group. So I interact with a lot of farmers and many other interested stakeholder groups. So I get to hear them firsthand myself. Our role as Critical Minerals Consortium here today is to provide you with evidence-based practical and actionable steps for policymaking. So our recommendations are focuses on 4 distinct but interrelated areas. Firstly, improving economic development outcomes. And secondly, preparing for climate resilient sector, because climate change is impacting everything. And of course, a lot of critical minerals are needed to mitigate climate change impact. And then wise, and Dr. Werner is a global expert on that who will come in. And of course, for the first topic that I alluded to, Professor David Whittle, who is a genius academic and also industry leader who would kind of throw some light. And third, tracking ESG risk performance, and which will be Vivian will throw some light on that, and mine rehabilitation and repurposing. Honorable members, our own research, we started researching this area in 2015. We published our first paper in 2020. And you would be astonished to hear that in Australia, we've got about 80,000 holes in the ground, which needs rehabilitation. And we had made a number of submissions to previous parliamentary committees. And
18,000.
80,000.
80,000.
And Victoria itself is home to 15,000 of them.
Right.
So we are doing a lot of, how can we repurpose them for productive uses, including some evidence in carbon farming as an opportunity and housing, because if you look at Victoria as a case, Victoria holds only 3% of national agricultural land, but it produces about 25% of agriculture produce.
Very high value. Very
high value, right? And if you look at the competing pressure between agriculture and housing, for example, 8,000 MCGs have been taken away from farmers to housing because we are growing in population. So how do you strike a balance whilst doing mining? Of course, we need to do because climate change is a global calamity, so we have to help them. So collectively, these recommendations are grounded in very thorough scientific evidence. Respond directly to concerns raised in the submissions to the inquiry and, of course, the terms of reference, and provide very practical pathways to strengthen Australia's critical mineral sector economically, socially, and environmentally. And we have a tremendous global role to play. That's Indo-Pacific. So that's where I've been a strong proponent of an Indo-Pacific alliance that is led by Monash University, because Monash has a lot of Indo-Pacific ambitions there. So we welcome committee's questions. With that, I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. And given that, I'm now going to turn to your other guests, or our guests this morning, and ask you to talk to us, because I really feel as though I want to hear from you before I commence any distinct line of questioning. If anyone else, whether it be Mr. Whittle or wherever we are now. So who would like to go next?
I'll go next. So my perspective today is informed by an engineering honours research project that I did last year, but it's also informed by my personal perspective as a young woman, young professional going into this mining industry and wanting to see it grow in a responsible way. So that's just my perspective. Ultimately, my research showed me that what we need is greater data transparency and ways to assess social and environmental risk in a way that allows all stakeholders, proponents, locals, lay people, to understand these risks in a cumulative manner. So in regions, for example, so my engineering project was focusing on rare earth element projects in northwest Victoria, so quite aligned with what Mr. Noor was talking about. These projects, I was looking at spatial data related to social and environmental risk. Because these locations, or because these mines are located in the same region, their risks aggregate and accumulate, but also because they have specific locations to them, they have a unique risk profile. So there's a place for individual and isolated risk assessment, but there's also a place for accumulated risk assessment. And this is reflected in many of the submissions that were submitted into this inquiry, talking about how, particularly in this region, it was difficult to reconcile how all these different projects would interact with each other once they were developed. And my other finding from my project was that just personal experience from this research is information is decentralized. It's fragmented. Some proponents publish some things, some proponents publish other things, and when they do publish the same kind of similar data, it's in different formats. So how do you reconcile this? How do you come and start from the same evidence base from different stakeholders and have a conversation when we're speaking from completely different evidence bases? So I think what I'm trying to say is that we need a trusted source which integrates information, which is transparent, reliable, and digestible for the layperson. And I think what my research is very closely linked to Dr. Werner's, who studies cumulative impact of mining and data disclosure and transparency. So perhaps I'll pass on to him.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Vivian, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here. My entire research career has involved trying to get data about the mining sector to understand what its impacts are. And I've been continually astonished at how little there is to use. We talked about trusts in the previous discussion and a cumulative trust deficit. Well, trust erodes and conflict blossoms in the absence of independent scientific information. If we can't have a shared understanding about what the impacts of a project are, different ideas are going to emerge. So how do we build that shared understanding? Well, we need data. What kind of data do we need? Things like land use, water, pollution, not just before the project, but also continuous monitoring during a project's lifetime and for the decades after, because social license is something that has to be maintained like a relationship across that entire mine life cycle. We can look to industry standards, voluntary standards, that tell us what the industry thinks is best practice for how to report on emissions to air, water, land impacts, and social performance. So you can look at things like the IRMA standards, IRMA, International Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. They have these very long documents that show here's what best practice looks like. But best practice primarily exists in the voluntary kind of space. Mines aren't required to produce this kind of information. Only some do when they perceive it to be of interest to their investors, essentially, where we can say, we can prove that we have a certified mine that is operating to the highest standards. But it's quite clear that at a sector level, that investor interest is not strong enough to drive widespread uptake of these standards. When we have a look at things like water use, for example, water is a source of conflict for mines so often. When they do report water in their sustainability reports, for example, you'll see a disclosure around how much water is used, perhaps, in their internal processes. Not how much was withdrawn from groundwater, how much was withdrawn from surface water, how much is in their tailings dams, how much is lost to evaporation, how much is being discharged to various sources. And that's just telling us about the kind of flows of water. It doesn't tell us about what is the ecosystem's capacity to deal with these changes. So that requires an additional body of knowledge and monitoring, and understanding impacts on biodiversity and understanding changes in water quality. And that has to be understood with reference to a long-term understanding of baseline water conditions as well. So that's just an example of how much there is to know about one impact category of many that may affect a community. And getting this information is incredibly difficult. So that was kind of my one point was to just talk about, can we move towards a situation where we have more mandatory reporting of information that is critical to a community's understanding of impact and actual impact as well?
Thank you, Dr. Werner. I note that we also have David Whittle online. David, did you want to make a contribution at this point?
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Swanson, or Chair. So the first thing I'd like to say is it's at the heart of all of this are generally small and medium-sized businesses, and I'm using that term fairly broadly because some of the companies in lithium do have, multi-billion-dollar market caps, but they're minnows compared to companies like BHP and Glencore, which are indeed involved in or are trying to be involved in the largest market for critical minerals, which is nickel, but that's proving to be extremely challenging, as you may already have heard. But really, we're talking about relatively small companies from a mining industry perspective. Australia's list of critical minerals, it covers 31 minerals in inverted commas. To give you an idea of how extensive that is, that covers 52 out of the 94 naturally occurring atoms in the universe, or at least on planet Earth. So it's really rather a lot. And if you think about that in terms of markets, there are many hundreds of different markets involved, upstream, downstream. The supply chains can be very long for lithium, rare earth elements, etc. So these are really quite difficult. Australia's list, a lot of the critical minerals lists are very long. Australia has 31 on it. I would contest, but half of those markets are really quite small, less than $1 billion globally. And for some of the critical minerals, for example, fluorine, none of the states have indicated that fluorine is something that they have in any great quantity that they want to pursue. So I think if to the extent that the list is used for the focus of federal government support for critical minerals, I would argue it really ought to be shorter and more focused on those minerals that really focused on things that can be developed in a region so that you can get that critical mass really working and strong and sustainable in the economic sense, which is, if it's not sustainable in an economic sense, it's not sustainable any other way. So that's the first thing. There are methods, I won't go into them in detail, but there are fairly sophisticated methods that can be used to achieve that in an analytical sense, and I think we just need to extend what's already been done. I've mentioned the companies are typically small to medium size, albeit sometimes in the billion-dollar market cap size. But that doesn't mean, but we do need to achieve large economies of scale to operate on these global markets against incredibly powerful interests in China and other areas who everyone's trying to seek power in the marketplace. And if we want to be a player in that, we really do need to achieve large economies of scale. For many, that suggests to people that it can only be done by large companies, but that's not true. It can be done under the right kind of market structures, aided by government, collaboratively with industry, to set up industrial ecosystems which are really, really efficient. It actually happens a lot in China, and in the paper that we've sent, I've given a brief example about the Almeria district in Spain, which produces 38% of Spain's horticultural output from 0.01% of its land, and it's there's no big companies. They're all small companies working collaboratively with mutuals and cooperatives. We see these mutual and cooperatives working in agriculture historically, where farmers come together and they pool their resources to provide, for example, downstream logistical support. And I'd argue we really need to be thinking hard about that. To Australia's great advantage, Monash University hosts the Mutual Value Lab, which is globally recognised as having expertise in designing mutuals and cooperatives, which are there to provide, so for example, if you have multiple miners and there's a need for a downstream processing facility, if that's a monopoly, a big company monopoly, then you've got an inefficient market structure there. But if it's set up as a cooperative, which is really servicing the needs of its members, which is could be the upstream suppliers, but also the community, local industries, etc. They can be very flexible. Then you end up with economies of scale but in an efficient way. So I think those are the main points I wanted to make, happy to discuss any of that further, of course.
Thank you, Dr. Whittle. I appreciate that. Actually, you've just sparked a thought in my mind. In the Hunter Valley, we have one of the most unique common user infrastructure cooperatives in the Hunter Valley coal chain, where we have the biggest, most competitive coal miners in the world. Like, these are massive companies. Think Glencore, BHP, all competing viciously, hammer and tong, to get coal on one coal line to one port. And such was the case that we had ships queued off the shore, and trying to get these coal wagons to port, that we had to set up a cooperative model. And it's basically a computer-based model run by a group of savants who are geniuses that get that coal from pit to port in a cooperative way, because it was the only way to make the competition work and viable. So I've got some lived experience of actually how that model can work in a ferociously competitive environment that is coal. So your point is well made, and I do think there are things that we could learn from mutuals, cooperatives, common user infrastructure models, where we will have to band together, quite frankly, to see the benefits maximised. So thank you for that point. So I can see that David has his hand up there and has unmuted himself, so I will come to you, David, and then I'll go to other members of the committee for lines of questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for your contribution. Chair, I just want to go back to what's really driving us and whether it's our mandate or our mission, is acceleration. And just to the contributors, how can we accelerate our timelines, yet keep the attributes of the qualities that we're trying to achieve in both environmental, community and societal pursuits here? Again, we're looking to try and accelerate the timelines, and I'd be interested to get your opinions on how we can accelerate the timelines and retain the attributes that are important to us.
If I can come in.
Well, I think perhaps if I could just start off, it is incredibly important that we don't reduce standards in what we do, environmental standards, community standards. We can't reduce those. They're critical to the success of any of these operations. And indeed, they're critical to the marketability of our products overseas increasingly. The people are looking for traceability, and they're looking for ethically sourced materials in Europe and also major corporations. And I think that's really the beginning of a growing trend. So our high standards are one of the...
Dr. Whittle, can I just pick up on that point very briefly? Yep. I note in your submission, and if I can quote directly from it, cleaner production of critical minerals can be a strategic differentiator for Australia. So we can actually get more value for them on the global market with maintaining those standards. But David's point's not lost on me. We're looking at two things here. We're looking at social licence and we're looking at economic development, all within a tighter time frame. But I take your point. I just couldn't let that moment slip by because I think it's actually an important point.
And retaining what were our objectives, which is all those environmental ones. So the real nub of it is coming down to what are the points we can accelerate on?
So I would point, and I can't say I'm close to the details, but Victoria, the Victorian government has been very successful in accelerating the rate at which it assesses and approves mining applications, development applications. It's done so without a single reduction in any of the standards. It's a challenge from a government's perspective, but they've in the last 12 to 18 months, they've made significant strides. So I can't talk to that in detail, I'm sorry, but to say that there's an example of it is definitely possible. One of the challenges is, of course, having a time frame. Often miners can deal with a faster time frame than communities can. And so we need to be cognizant of that and make sure that we take communities along on the journey at an appropriate pace. So the details, I think, is just looking internally at the processes, having internal champions who can deal with the many government departments that need to be dealt with, etc.
I think those internal champions are referred to as ministers. Anyway, thank you for that. Professor Yalishetty, I'll let you pick up on that line of thought.
Yeah, thanks, David, I think, for putting a great foundation there. Victoria is a testing case where I think from our informal conversations, we understood that Victoria has reduced the timelines by 40%, which is amazing, right? But again, that also links back to availability of data. For example, AIS, the advent of AI, the tools like GIS, and the kind of information that we have handy today compared to 10 years ago. Maybe there's a lot of that redundancy that we need to kind of get rid of. So without compromising on some of the basic tenets of what that would look like. Because Australia, we have world-class expertise in METS capabilities, mining equipment, technology and services. So is our credibility in terms of ESG. And many Australian companies operate across the continents, right? So that means we can take our ESG credentials wherever we go and do that. So perhaps that is one of the important learning. And as I said, how do we, without compromising, how can we do it? Is through, all the stakeholders start working from the day one. So that I've been very strong advocate of. Universities, we've got plenty of that research capabilities. And the government has a mission to kind of drive the growth of regions and development of some of critical minerals. Industry, our industry is the best in the world. And then communities. So we need to come together to kind of make that difference. And we can create a new history in our backyard. So that opportunity is right here. Perhaps my colleague, Dr. Werner, also has got something to say based on some of the data sets and so on.
Yeah, well, I think on the topic of timelines and acceleration, I think that will be a byproduct of effective screening. Right. So if you can identify which mining regions are lower risk by understanding things like the proximity to communities, overlap with protected areas and indigenous lands and so on, we can kind of benchmark and we can say, okay, this is a region that has several flags that is likely to face more challenges along the kind of development journey versus another region. But I would add another overlay to that, just to kind of relate back to the submission, which is climate change. And this is going to affect how productive the site actually is. Because if we've had a look at the last few years, we've lost over billions of dollars in production just from things like rail lines flooding. So this goes back also to the fact that we've got a very spread out geography. These mines are very spread over a very large area. They have to share infrastructure over extended areas, which adds to their exposure to these extreme events, and that affects Australia's competitiveness at a global stage. And the fact that we have a lot of smaller companies means that they're actually more vulnerable. So we've seen in our research that larger companies are impacted less by these extreme weather events compared to smaller companies.
Is that a factor of larger companies being able to absorb the impact? Is that sort of what clearly climate change is going to impact the way it impacts. Yeah. So that's really more a function of a big company being able to absorb the hit. Is that what you're driving at there, or is that...
Yeah, so they have more capabilities to protect their infrastructure, for example. Yes. But if a flood cuts off the main rail between Mount Isa and Townsville, that whole region is shut off, potentially for months on end, regardless of their capacity. But the problem is that these companies, they are reasonably good at protecting their own assets at the mine site, but not necessarily working together to build a cumulative kind of adaptive and resilient sector. And that is costing the sector a lot of money and reducing its productivity, and it's impacting development timelines for projects too. But at the same time, it's impacting things like rehabilitation success. So if we look to 2040, we'll see that some mine sites will have to deal with way more flood-associated rainfall than they do now, while others will have to deal with way less rainfall throughout the year, meaning they might not actually have enough to do their rehabilitation, and then you start competing with community interests in terms of access to water. And so identifying all of these issues early would allow us to prioritise certain areas or build resilience for certain areas, which would deliver better, less disrupted pipelines.
Thank you for that. Sure, would you like to pick up some questions, please?
Yes, please. I've got kind of three little ones, I think, just to get your viewpoints. So it would seem like if we are trying to accelerate timelines, that to start with existing tailings would be sensible, where there's already presumably some infrastructure. We've already dug the dirt out, it's kind of sitting there waiting to be reprocessed. Is that reasonable?
No, absolutely. I think that's where I was coming to. Most of the tailings dams of the past, because of the fact that the processing technologies were not as efficient as they are today. So we left a lot of valuables. And also critical minerals are only 10, 15 years, story, right? So that means we never bothered. For example, when we were extracting copper, we discarded cobalt, we discarded molybdenum, for example. So many of them, as Honourable Member said, we have already done a lot of groundwork. That means we crushed them, we ground them, and they are sitting there. And they are actually legacy assets. They are causing a lot of trouble to many of our communities in the regional areas. But one of the problems that when we talk, because I'm also a mentor to a couple of mining startup companies, for example, EKN. So what they do is electrokinetic recovery of critical minerals. Now, because they are backing on the price of the gold, because gold is now at historic high. So when any metal that is associated with gold tailings, you can easily recover, because gold can pay 80%, and then rest is contributed by, say, for example, antimony.
Antimony was going to be it's a byproduct of gold, essentially, isn't it?
Exactly.
But very valuable in defence usage and. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Victoria, we are very fortunate to have both rare earth elements as well as antimony. So we are working, Professor Richel and myself are on the advisory as well with Vivian. So we would rate them as tier 1 or tier 2 deposits for critical minerals, right? So because there are already much of that. But the problem is that common user infrastructure. So for example, this company, which is a startup CSIRO spun-off company, EKN, based in WA. So their technology is about in situ recovery. So without moving dirt, because if you are to rehandle all of this dirt, millions of tons, it would make uneconomical. So how can we recover the metals of interest in situ is something that we need to investigate. And in fact, as a matter of fact, honourable members, we were called into a study that was commissioned by Honourable Matt Canavan back in 2018. GA commissioned that report, and we were one of the kind of leaders and one of the recommendations that we made through that report was we need to go and do redigging of some of these tailings dams to understand what potential they have. And we said that, and as a matter of fact, after that report was submitted, so there was an existing program called Exploring for the Future program that was commissioned by Geoscience Australia, of course, the Department of Resources, Honourable Madeleine King. And then they added on secondary prospectivity work, and where some of our colleagues got involved in. So, but the problem with that is they only explored, they just scratched the surface. Now we need to go deeper, 20 meters deeper, and then understand to really estimate the potential of that. So these could become real assets where they're already concentrated form. So that means, we can make that work. That means it's win-win. One, you are getting the critical minerals that are needed, but at the same time, you are also making them safer in perpetuity, so that the contamination will not happen. So that's one of the main. But the main challenge is that common user infrastructure is what we need to create, and in absence of that, we need to provide some incentives to some of these mining startup companies.
And sorry, I do have to go. I've got a plane to catch. But the other two questions that I was just going to ask was, you've suggested narrowing the list of critical minerals down, and I was wondering what that number would look like, what that would be. And also, Vivian, to what you talked about with being a trusted source and having that, comparing apples with apples ability, what would you suggest around that, like templates, or what would be your recommendations? But I'm afraid I'm going to have to read the transcript on the answers.
That's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. So just on that first one, how long should the list be? I would say shorter, but I don't want to put a number on it because I think it's really got to be subject to a proper process. And I won't actually name any markets either. Except you might see some suggestions from what the state governments have done in the report we've provided. I think it's about a process, and it's really about answering the question, can we, what's the likelihood we can build a viable regional industrial ecosystem to supply these minerals to the world, given all we know about the complexities of the markets, etc. That's really, I think, the examination that's got to be done.
Dr. Whittle, if I might just insert some thinking there, it strikes me that a starting point would be two things. Firstly, the demand priority of the globe for, we know, for example, samarium cobalt is extremely sought after. And that would then have to be overlaid with, indeed, what we have here, and so one, what the market's demanding, and the foreseeable future of what we see will be in high demand and priority. Two, what we have, and three, the geopolitical tensions vis-a-vis China and constraints. That's just my top of mind thinking on it, but potentially, and I'm sure there are smarter people than me thinking about this, but that would be a starting point for potentially how we honed that list.
I agree, and I think you've really honed in on the key issues. There are for a mining company there are 1,000 considerations, and you need to go down the list and see which ones are killers.
There's got to be a market, though. First things first, there's got to be a market. Otherwise, no one's digging up anything.
And in the report, I've listed the critical minerals markets in order of their global market size, because I think it's important to acknowledge that. Indeed, Geoscience Australia has already looked at what the geological potential is as well. So those things are done, but it's really a multidisciplinary. It's not just about geology, not just about the headline numbers, but the complexity. So there are commercial groups like Benchmark Mineral Intelligence that they make their their trade is understanding these markets in tremendous detail. One of the things, however, they're also an expensive service that all these small players can't really necessarily afford. So there may be a role for government in helping smaller companies access the information they need on markets. And to Tim's point earlier, the information about climate change and things like that. Small mining companies can't afford to employ too many climate scientists. They can't afford to employ any. So where do they get the information they need? And I think that's something that government could help to provide.
Indeed, thank you. Ash, did you have anything that... No, okay, no problem.
That's where one of the recommendations from out of Vivian's research was we recommend government kind of allocating some funding to develop an ESG tracker tool, and also that kind of embeds some of the proprietary data. For example, some private companies have kind of embedded into their models.
Interesting. And just before we close out, I will pick up on the point. I'm a great fan of Geoscience Australia, and I love their atlas of Australia. I love looking at where all the things are, and I'd certainly recommend anyone listening to go and do that. But the blue cap point, Mr. Farley has a question, sure. Using that blue cap, I did note with interest that you recommended the blue cap tool as well.
I think that does relate partly to Ms. Cook's second question about who should provide this sort of platform and how should it be, like what kind of form should it take. And I think that's where the Blue Cap platform that's already in existence, it provides a whole range of, it brings together a whole range of data to assess economic viability, as well as geographic and geological information. And perhaps this is a potential solution, one that's provided by an independent source. In the submissions, locals have raised the need for an independent, sort of verified information source because they don't trust proponents. And proponents have actually raised the same thing as well because they have struggles with having their message received well. So
it's a sort of source of truth.
Yeah, exactly. And it comes back to what we were saying about, uncertainty, fear and distrust comes from uncertainty, and uncertainty comes from this lack of information. Perhaps if we have time, some of my colleagues could elaborate on the Blue Cap model, if that's of interest.
Certainly. We are rapidly running out of time, but I'd be really happy to hear about your thoughts on it.
In fact, I was part of the Blue Cap development team. One of my colleagues, Dr. Stuart Walsh, associate professor, he was the one who led it. But we had one of our former PhD students, Dr. Stephen Northey, who was part of that in developing that. Now that has become one of the game-changing kind of tools, because in the mining phase, when you start from scoping to pre-feas to feasibility to bankable feasibility. So we have developed a tool where you could potentially look for next nickel mine or next cobalt mine. So that's where we call it as pre-scoping. I think a similar tool can be even made more powerful by kind of integrating into other aspects of the things that we are looking into, finding some answers to.
Excellent. Look, thank you very much for that. I really do appreciate your time today. You're going to be sent a copy of your evidence and you'll have an opportunity to request corrections to any transcription errors. But thank you for your excellent submission. Thank you more broadly for the contribution you're making to our nation in the work that you're doing. It's certainly a booming and emerging sector, and we do need great minds across it, and it strikes me that yours are such. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah. We need all the clever folk on this.
We need funding for honourable members.
Yes.
I guess so. Can they keep the name tag? Or the
Feel free, of course.
Why not?
Yes.
Chair, if I may ask you a question.
Yes, I've just dismissed the witnesses. David, did
No,
you?
that's fine.
Yeah, sure.
That was fine. That's fine. I think the witnesses was a great contribution to what we're trying to achieve, and the gem that I got out of it was similar to the question or the answer I was seeking yesterday. Where else do we go to in the world to seek someone doing it better than us? And what I got out of the witnesses today was that Victoria seems to be doing it better than anyone else. And I parlay that across to what I find in agribusiness. Major projects in agribusiness are 4 to 5 years in New South Wales, and Victoria can turn the same project round in 18 months and give approval. And we're losing, in my seat of Farrer, we're losing projects to Victoria just because of the compliance excellence that Victoria's been able to adopt.
Yes, point well made. Thank you. Thank you, David. Right, okay. It's all virtual? Yes, okay, very good. They're all there, ready to go. Wonderful, thank you. Let me just find my papers for that.
They're all online.
Yes, yes. Okay, we'll continue on. I now welcome representatives of the CSIRO today to give evidence. For the Hansard record, I can't see you yet, so how about we, if I could see you, I might ask you all to turn on your cameras. Thank you very much. Now, potentially because you're online, I might direct you if that will make it easier. So we might start with Dr. Walden and then Dr. Vernon, I can see, and Dr. Barber. Sorry, if we go in that order, I'll ask that you state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee today.
Well, thank you, Chair. My name's Dr. Andrea Walton. I'm a senior social scientist at CSIRO in the Environment Research Unit.
Thank you.
My name is Dr. Chris Vernon. I'm a Chief Research Scientist specialising in critical minerals for CSIRO.
Thank you so much.
Hello, Dr. Marcus Barber. I'm a Principal Research Scientist in the Environment Unit of CSIRO and primarily an anthropologist by training.
Thank you. And Ms. Warren, we have you there as well?
Yes, Louisa Warren, Executive Manager, Indigenous Science and Engagement at the CSIRO.
Thank you very much. I'll give the opportunity for the committee to introduce themselves to you as well. Mr. Farley, would you like to commence, please?
Thank you, and welcome to all. I suppose our objective and our
hang on, David. I just want you to introduce yourself firstly.
Sorry.
I've got to do some procedural things first.
Procedural things. Okay, good. Thank you, and sorry about my impatience. My name's David Farley. I'm the federal MP for Farrer, and Farrer is located in the southwestern quarter of a section of New South Wales.
Thank you, David.
Ash Ambihaper, the federal member for Barton. Barton is in the southern side of Sydney Airport.
And Meryl Swanson, Committee Chair and Member for Paterson in the New South Wales, Hunter and Port Stephens regions. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I should advise you that this hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament and therefore has the same standings as proceedings of the House. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as a contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. And I'd now invite you to make a brief opening statement before we proceed to discussion.
Okay, it's my pleasure today to give an overview on behalf of my colleagues. So thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. CSIRO welcomes the opportunity to contribute to the committee's inquiry into factors shaping social licence, economic development outcomes and critical minerals projects across Australia. As Australia's national science agency, CSIRO undertakes research across the critical minerals value chain, everything from exploration, processing, environmental, social performance, regional development and stakeholder engagement. CSIRO has a long history of working in partnership with traditional owners and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. Our relationships have been built over decades, and we recognise the role that CSIRO can play to support the self-determination of Indigenous communities across Australia through Indigenous-led, co-designed, collaborative partnerships. And we're committed to working respectfully with Indigenous Australians, and this is embedded within some of CSIRO's principles. CSIRO's research with First Nations organisations absolutely highlights their strong interest in shaping and participating in the critical minerals sector, including through employment, business opportunities, and involvement in decision-making processes. On the harder side of things, though, our research also identifies significant opportunities to capture greater value through downstream processing, circular economy approaches, and recovery of critical minerals from waste streams. And it was really good to hear Professor Yellishetty earlier talking about that. In our opinion, there are three main areas where CSIRO's research may assist the committee: effective management with communities and traditional owners, contribution of critical minerals to regional and national economic development, and the role of governments in supporting socially and economically sustainable development. Our research shows that successful critical minerals development requires both technical capability and community confidence. I think Australians, by and large, recognise the importance of critical minerals in supporting economic prosperity, advanced manufacturing, and the transition to net zero emissions. So CSIRO's role, just to make it very clear, is to provide independent scientific evidence to support informed decision-making by governments, industry, and communities. So we thank the committee for this opportunity, and we welcome your questions.
Thanks, Dr. Vernon, and it is interesting, isn't it, how you get people together and the ideas do start to coalesce and things shake down, if I can use that sort of mining terminology. Yep. One of the things that I do want to pick up from the Critical Minerals Consortium, particularly where Vivian was talking about data, and I think this is really important from a CSIRO perspective, given that you are our chief scientific institution. And so, the big thing for me is this: we've got trust. We've got a trust deficit in communities. People have stopped trusting institutions and governments and politicians and information. There's, no one's trusting much anymore. But if I can say to you that I still believe that CSIRO has a great deal of value in trust. I think people still trust you, which is great. And as governments, we need to lean into that. And then, for my mind, what we were learning about data. So there seems to be, I don't want to say a dearth of data, because I'm actually quite sure there's a lot of data, but how it's used, whether or not it's discernible for communities particularly. So I see that as a role that potentially CSIRO can play. So sorry, I am rambling a little bit now, but I'm really just sort of thinking about CSIRO's value to this debate and how we add value. One, you've got the trust. Two, you've got the data. How do we maximise that is where my mind is at the moment.
Sure. I could ramble about that for quite a while, but I wonder if Andrea...
And I apologise, I didn't mean to go extreme of consciousness, but I'm just...
No, that's okay. That's okay. We could spend a whole afternoon talking about it. Andrea might have been the closest to some of the social licence work that we've been doing, and I'll let her respond to that.
Thank you, Chris. This is a great question, Chair. I've done a lot of work through the Gazira Alliance, which really looked at providing important information to communities, matters of concern, information that was accessible to them, and this was done through an alliance, and there was great emphasis placed on providing information that communities really were interested in, wanting to understand in a format that was accessible to them, and often this was relayed by scientists.
And I think that's the nub of the issue we're really getting to here. And so in relation to that, if we are as a government going to develop comprehensive guidance around this, what are your thoughts on that, Andrea, given what you've just said, doing that work?
I think understanding, so people have already sort of mentioned how critical it is to have meaningful engagement, and that also includes understanding what communities want to know about and what it is that matters to them, as well as some of the technical information. So, and presenting that information in a manner that they can engage with, understand, is really important.
I want to actually draw on an example that I have had some personal interaction with. We had a situation in my electorate where there was a proposed energy development, offshore wind, and the department, I feel, conducted the consultation poorly. And I'll give you the hands-on experience that we had. So they came into our community and said, look, this is what, this is the proposal, and we want to engage in community consultation. We want to see what the community's feeling is. Well, the problem is that the community, and today broadly, communities are they're able to Google things, they're available to pick up information, some of it higher quality than others. So they came with a lot of questions, but sadly the questions weren't able to be answered. So we often have within project guidelines that we need to conduct community consultation. We go into a community and we say, well, what do you think about this? And rightfully people say, well, where's the information on it? What are you actually going to do, and what are the benefits going to be? And often well-meaning public servants, and this is a model that I think it needs improvement, but they'll say, oh no, we're just here to get how you feel about it. Well, we can't tell you how we feel unless we have more information. So it just becomes this nonsensical catch-22 situation where, well, we want to know how you feel. Well, we can't tell you because we don't have enough information. Or we're not here to give you much information. We're just here to see how you feel. And that strikes me in a world where information is abundant. I'm not suggesting it's good information or bad information. It's just information. So we come back to scientific principles of data, quality information, and I want to use the word discernible information. You need to be able to process the information. It needs to be in language that people can understand.
I agree, Chair. I think all those points are relevant. I don't know any sort of details of the specific case you're referring to.
And I'm not asking you to get into the specifics. No. I'm just using that as an example of where in the past where we've gone wrong. We're well-meaning, we want to talk to communities, but communities don't know how they feel unless they've got some more information.
Yes, and certainly our research has shown the importance of two-way information sharing. So hearing what communities want to know about and then making sure communities get that information and closing that loop is very important for people to feel that the engagement has been meaningful and that they've had a real chance to participate.
Okay, thank you. David, did you want to pick up a line of questioning here, or would you like me to continue? I just want to make sure everyone gets an opportunity. You're just on mute there. You might need to unmute.
I may leave it to you, Chair, but I'm just keen to emphasise kind of our mission or our focus on urgency.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So, like all things, this entire critical minerals space, there is an urgency, but we've had to underline that doesn't mean in any way we want to diminish the processes. And the point was made to me a couple of days ago, indeed from the mining sector, which I think is really interesting, that Australia does have world-class environmental standards. And if you get the tick for a project in Australia, you know that it has been rigorous. So I think it's important that we maintain standards, but that doesn't mean, particularly with the use of technology and AI and all the things, that we can't do things at pace and more efficiently. I think that's actually the critical thing here. How do we maintain standards while being able to fulfil the criticality of the timeframes and the actual projects themselves? Ash, would you like to pick up some questions, please? Yes, thank you.
Chair. Also, happy 100th birthday, Cyrus. So I just want to add that. My questions are around the First Nations piece. So there's some parts of the submission that has focused on, I guess, the assessment approval processes on First Nations organisations, and then also just understanding being more effective or providing more effective support and sustainable development with First Nation communities, etc. Are you able to, what do we need to do to make engagement practices, I guess, better able to meet the aspirations of First Nations people? And then the second question is, how do we create opportunities as well for First Nations people with that co-design and co-invest in critical mineral projects? If that's, I'm not sure who to direct that to, but
that could well be any of my other three colleagues. Somebody put their hand up.
I will start.
Brilliant.
I will start from an organisational wide perspective, and thank you for raising that question. As you would have heard in our opening statement, we have a long history of working in partnership with traditional owners across the country, across all of our research areas. And our space and our capability has grown in this space over the last 5 years in terms of how we do this respectfully and how we do this in supporting Indigenous-led research priorities as well. And so our research has shown, and I will hand over to my colleagues shortly, in terms of how do we look at the self-determination of Indigenous communities and how do we also support them in terms of, making sure that the benefits and the tangible benefits are flowing back into the communities of where, they are traditional custodians of country. In the organisation, we've invested in research projects that demonstrate that value of Indigenous-led co-design research approaches, ensuring Indigenous knowledge and leadership shape those outcomes. And we've also, at an organisational-wide level, changed a range of processes internally to address federal government commitments, including the Minister's Statement of Expectation, the National Science Research Priorities, and the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. So I just wanted to mention that at a very wide level in terms of who we are as an organisation and our commitments in this space. But I will hand to my colleague, Dr. Marcus Barber, who can talk to more of the research that he's doing on the ground with community.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louisa, and thank you to the inquiry for the opportunity. So I think the previous, you've had some very well-founded submissions from some of the major Indigenous organisations, particularly some of the regional land councils in Northern Australia, speaking to some of these issues. From the point of view of CSIRO, we very much understand our role as decision support with respect to engagement, but that Indigenous leadership of projects and Indigenous leadership more generally is requiring new forms of collaboration. The two things that I would really, which also speak to the member for Farah's comments, early engagement is essential. So one of the luxuries we have as a research organisation is we sometimes are coming in the very early stage of a process of thinking, and that is incredibly important from the perspective of traditional owners, that they're not finding out things when everything's been worked up and it's are you ready to sign off on this? And that the way that a conversation starts and the earlier it starts, the better usually the outcome is. So that ability to not hold back is critical, and we found that in our research, that it tends to have a cascading effect through a whole lot of other aspects of the engagement. I think the other thing from our point of view that we found from the research that we've been doing is that from a traditional owner perspective, and I'll make one more comment about other perspectives in a moment, that they are taking a country first perspective. And so they're particularly concerned with what this particular form of development will mean for other aspirations about their country. And that is an incredibly important framing or reference and framing that comes through quite regularly. So in understanding how to engage with a critical minerals project is partly understanding what it means for other things that are incredibly important in the landscape. And then the only other aspect of engagement I think that is very important to emphasise is the diversity within Indigenous Australia, and that we work with that. Yeah. And that means in this circumstance that there are traditional owners with strong connections to country, there are Indigenous residential communities who may be looking at opportunities and impacts from their perspective. Mm-hmm. And then there's also Indigenous mining companies, Indigenous contracting, Indigenous employees, and they're all positioned differently with respect to these issues. And so it's incredibly important in any engagement process that there's an expectation of diversity of perspective. And that goes back to the timing point, that then people need time to process how that diversity of perspectives will relate to any particular project or initiative.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for that contribution, Dr. Barber. And I think what you've just highlighted there is for traditional owners, Indigenous groups, there is as much diversity and differentiation of points of view as there are for any groups across the country. And I think that's an important thing. There's a diversity of groups, there's a diversity of opinions, no different to any other communities of interest within the broader Australian context, and that's something that we need to remember as well. I do want to just come to, well, we touched on it briefly before, but the idea, and Professor Yelchetty talked about the idea of circularity and potentially looking at re-prosecuting some of the tailings dams, and I'm interested in CSIRO's thoughts on the difficulty of that. And I know we're probably getting into technical areas now, but I'd be just interested to get some thoughts, albeit broad thoughts, on from a technical and reality perspective, how hard that might be. Or is it simpler than we think because we've already got them in concentrated forms? Is anyone prepared to sort of wade into that area? I know it's tricky, but I know you mentioned it in your submission. I feel like there's a synergistic timing here with one set of witnesses raising it and this next set. So I want to pick your brilliant minds on that as well while we've got you. Are we sort of just saying it's going to be easy because we've already got them there, or is it actually technically harder and people are going to come back to me in 12 months and say, look, that was a great idea, but it was just all too hard and it's all contaminated and we can't do it, and you should just move on and do new primary product projects?
I am very happy to answer that one. And I'm very happy to say it depends.
Sure.
Because not all tailings dumps, dams, waste rock is the same as every other. There are no doubt many opportunities, but when anybody comes to me and says, oh, we're going to extract XYZ from tailings, I say, which tailings, where, what chemistry are you using? And they sort of look at me like, you haven't got the religion, this is what we're going to do. It is a technical issue and also a legislative issue as well. Often there are things in tailings dams that are worth extracting. And you do have that great advantage that the rock has all been smashed up into very fine particles. You don't have to grind it. You don't have to ship it from wherever it came from. It's all sitting there waiting. Very often, if it's critical minerals in there, yes, you will find critical minerals, but sometimes the levels are maybe a little bit low. So you've got to look for some more innovative processing technology. It's not as simple as switching on a tap and saying, yes, we're going to do it. But having said that, if you pick your tailings, pick your processing, I have a firm belief, and I've spent the last 40 years in mineral processing, I have a firm belief that some tailings are going to be absolutely wonderful resources. Around other issues, somebody reminded me recently at a conference that, well, we got a tax write-off on building that tailings dam. We got a tax write-off on managing the tailings, when we go back and get the critical minerals out of there, that's a new resource. Are we going to have to then go back to the tax office and say, sorry, we're going to give you back what it costs to put the tailings there? So that's a legislative tax issue. Another one is sometimes they are toxic. I won't say toxic waste dumps, but sometimes there are problem elements that you probably don't want to see again. And you'll find that a lot of tailings around Australia are also mothballed rather than abandoned. So a company still has the ownership, still has to look after them.
I think that's called care and maintenance, isn't it? That's
care and maintenance, absolutely. It's on care and maintenance and it's sitting there doing nothing. So the next company that comes along that wants to do something, do they get the liabilities? So it's actually a complex area, but it's one that we haven't explored enough. So a lot of happy people saying this is a possibility, this is the future. Yes, in some cases, yes, but there's still a lot of work to be done before we get there.
And Dr. Vernon, if I can just pick up on something else you've alluded to in that answer. Processing is one of the big things that the committee's mind will need to be focused on, because this is not just about extraction. You know, we've got just a bit over 200 years of extraction since the first coal was taken out of my part of the world at Fort Scratchley in 1797 and shipped to India. So we're good at extracting. We're very good at mining sciences. We've already talked about that briefly today. But this downstream processing and value adding, for my mind, is something that is both difficult here in Australia, given our constraints with water, given we don't have any, well, we do have space constraints, but there are constraints, but it is something that we potentially need to really think about, and CSIRO obviously is one of the first places that we would do that. So how are we placed in terms of processing, metallurgy, all of the things that will go into value adding these critical minerals, these rare earths, both light and heavy rare earths? It's a long way from mine to magnet is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And how do we get a bigger slice of that pie? Because we are so good at digging it up and digging and shipping, and I am not being disparaging when I say that. What we do it incredibly well in Australia. And we, in fact, export our mining expertise across the world, as was made evident before.
Yep.
But we do need to do more in terms of value adding.
Indeed. There are some things, as you point out, that digging and shipping is a really good idea because they're bulk materials and somebody else wants to make them into steel or something. In terms of critical minerals, it's quite a different market because Alan Trench from UWA talks about convex and concave value chains. With things like iron ore, you get a lot of the value very early on when you put it on the ship. With critical minerals, you really get the tiniest, you get pennies in the dollar for digging and shipping. And the more you process, the more payback you get. And you know, the ultimately turning rare earths into magnets is the highest form of a business, I guess.
And that hence my comment, mine to magnet, you know.
Yeah, we do have to get better in Australia at adding value. I think it is very definitely a federal government strategy that we will get there, but it comes down to individual companies who want to get into the value chain. I think with critical minerals, it's in some ways harder because you have to make things that are to much higher specification, higher purity. We're talking at the moment looking at even being able to analyse some of the levels of purity that are required for some of these materials just to become common commodities. But on the other hand, because these are much smaller industries, it's not like turning all of the Pilbara into steel. We are actually looking at much smaller volumes, much smaller flows. So we've got some really outstanding examples in Australia at the moment. Nearstar very quickly turned around their Port Perry operations and they're making antimony. That was always there in the lead ore, but now they're extracting it. Linus with Mount Weld, we're now making mixed rare earth carbonates in Australia, which are going to Malaysia to be refined. Iluka have plans and they're building an actual rare earth refinery, not making metals, but that's part of their plan. Metals aren't magnets, but it's a very long way towards the ultimate goal. So I am quite upbeat about what Australia can do, but one of the things we have to recognise is that it's always going to be cheaper to do it somewhere else. So subsidised industry overseas, much lower power costs, lower labour costs. So one of the things we do at CSIRO, as well as trying to give government some technical information in this space, is also develop processes that use less water, use less power. And that's really where we should be heading as a nation in critical minerals R&D, is to reduce those processing costs and reduce the environmental impact in Australia.
So again, we were talking earlier about product differentiation in terms of, environmental type things. This strikes me as the other end of that same spectrum, that we're not going to be all things to all people, and we're not going to be able to process every rare earth and critical mineral, but getting back to the consortia saying maybe we need to look at our list, and maybe we really need to look at where the value proposition is for us, where we can do it more effectively or in a novel way that will add value in terms of the global demand. David, you've got a contribution or a question, please?
Oh, you're on mute.
You're just on mute. Isn't that the line of the last 5 years?
Sorry, I've got a contribution and an unfortunate exit because I've got a fire drill happening around me.
Oh, okay. We need to do that.
So, but I'll take the quick time. I think you're correct. This is not a commodity, and provenance will be important to this, and creating the provenance around it will ultimately enhance its valuable and its desirability to the market. But again, the importance that we're looking at is trying to capture all of that, what we're doing, and accelerating the timeline. And my office manager's telling me I've got to get out.
All
so
right. Well,
I'm going to say hi and bye.
All right, go thee well, and follow the signs, the green ones.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, David. All the best. Look, I think we will draw it to a close there. Is there anything else that pressing that we haven't asked you about that you would just, any closing remarks or any points that you'd like to make, either Dr. Vernon or others? And look, I know this has been a broad-ranging discussion today, and we do appreciate your contribution by way of your submission and more broadly the work that you do. Is there anything else that you wanted to let the committee know before we close out?
Without cutting off my colleagues, I would just like to say that CSIRO is here to assist the nation in whatever way we can, both on the front of social outcomes, environmental outcomes, and economic outcomes. We kind of live for this kind of thing.
Of course you do, and you've been living it for 100 years or more, which we certainly recognise and thank you for. And may you live and continue to go from strength to strength for another 100. Look, thank you so much for your evidence today. You will be asked, actually no, you haven't been asked to provide any additional information. You'll be sent a copy of your transcript, and you'll have the opportunity to request corrections to any errors. So thank you so much again, and go well, and we thank you for your contribution. I will now declare the hearing closed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.